This video of Mexican militaries executing Sicarios is going viral. Do you have to get your hands dirty to beat the bad guys? Do you have to beat them at their game and become an anti-hero just to get justice? Is justice even worth that much? This video of Mexican military personnel executing Sicarios is going viral. These military men were caught staging this massacre to look like a shootout between them and cartel members. And it shows one thing: these officers are willing to do whatever it takes to get the bad guys, even if it means playing against the rules. Staged shootout by Fuerzas Armadas.
The soldiers appear to defend themselves from another threat off camera, and that is when they shoot their prisoners.
At first glance, this footage looks like a group of soldiers engaged in a shootout of some sort, right? Well, things may not always be as they appear. On May 18th, 2023, a CCTV camera with the timestamp 1440 captured this chilling moment where the Fuerzas Armadas captured a group of 5 men suspected to be Sicarios and murdered them. But that wasn't where it ended. They executed these men and then planted their own weapons close to the bodies to make it look like a shootout among cartel members. You probably missed it, but not to worry. We'll circle back to the very beginning of this video. The footage starts with a black pickup truck driving at full speed, suddenly slamming into a perimeter fence in the northwestern city of Nuevo Laredo, which is close to the U.S. border. Apparently involved in a chase, a second vehicle, which is an armored car with a roof-mounted machine gun, bashes into the side of the vehicle. Men who appeared to be soldiers then got out of the armored car, opened the door of the crashed truck, and pulled 5 men out. They appeared to have guns with them, so these men likely worked for cartels as Sicarios, which translates to hitmen or assassins. In case you didn't know, Sicarios are the armed group within the drug cartels. These people carry out the really dirty work like assassinations, kidnappings, thefts, and other violent crimes against rival cartel groups, law enforcement agencies, and sometimes civilians. The soldiers pulled the men to the edge of the fence, hidden by some shrubbery, and at some point you could see one of these soldiers kicking a man who was lying on the ground.
The soldiers pull them out, kick them.
At some point, the soldiers appeared to be arranging the men they had captured along the fences, while clearly shouting orders among themselves as seen in their disposition. Soon after, some of the soldiers were seen hiding behind the black truck and shooting at some unknown assailants who weren't captured in the camera. And this exactly is the moment that had everyone talking. Several questions come to mind with this particular moment that was caught on camera. Some people believe that the Fuerzas Armadas, after capturing the Sicarios, ran into some trouble with other members of the cartel who came to rescue their buddies. These people even believe that during the shootouts, bullets could be seen hitting the grass surrounding the soldiers. For many others, this isn't the case. They believe the Fuerzas Armadas had staged the shootout like they were being attacked, while some other soldiers subtly executed the accosted men. For one, the soldiers' lackadaisical attitude right before the shootout didn't give off any sign that they were being attacked by these unknown shooters. Also, some of the soldiers had moved off the camera to stand across the road, so it was likely that while the other soldiers pretended to be shot at, these other soldiers had then shot at the men as seen in the movement of the grass where the men had been made to stay.
And that is when they shoot their prisoners.
What happened next further confirms what almost everyone believes. The soldiers indeed staged the shootout because as soon as it subsided, they were seen moving the guns of the prisoners close to their bodies. Aside from this being suspicious, the soldier in charge of this task was seen holding the guns with what appeared to be a red cloth or bag wrapped around his hand for apparent reasons. He didn't want his fingerprints on the gun.
After that, one of the soldiers plants weapons on the fallen men, careful to use what looks to be a red flag to avoid getting his prints on the guns.
One soldier was also seen retrieving what might have been keys from another soldier, and shortly after, a handcuff was seen dangling from his hand. What this means is that the soldiers had purposely taken off the handcuff put on a man so that it appeared like they hadn't been captured first.
One soldier even appears to take off the handcuffs they put on a man to make it look like he hadn't been arrested before being shot.
After these shenanigans were completed, some paramedics arrived at the scene and took the bodies of the fallen men away in ambulances. Later reports stated that 4 of the men had died on the spot, while the 5th died on the way to the hospital. It was easy to see why this seemed like the perfect place to carry out this execution, since Nuevo Laredo was a region known for being home to criminal violence. It seemed like the perfect cover-up. Unfortunately, a CCTV camera had captured everything that happened, which put a blight on their otherwise perfect plan. This viral video, published by a Spanish newspaper and U.S. broadcaster, got everyone talking, and while some do not seem to mind the dirty game played by these soldiers, several others believe that the captured men should have been allowed to face the law rather than being executed in that manner. Guadalupe Correa Cabrera, an associate professor at George Mason University who studies the border, stated that the soldiers were apparently trying to alter the crime scene to make it look like there had been an armed confrontation. It seems that the intention was to leave these bodies with weapons to make it look like a confrontation between armed groups of civilians, as has happened before, said Correa Cabrera. In fact, the Mexican government seemed greatly displeased by this extrajudicial execution, as the Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, made this clear in a press briefing. He stated that the killing of 5 men captured on the CCTV footage was an apparent execution that wouldn't go unpunished.
It seems that there were unlawful killings, and that can't be allowed. We're not the same as the past governments. When there is an abuse, an excess, a violation of human rights, there has to be punishment of those responsible, and that's already started.
It seems there were unlawful killings, and that can't be allowed. We're not the same as the past government. When there's an abuse, an excess, a violation of human rights, there has to be punishment of those responsible, and that's already started. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador seemed particularly displeased with the shooting, as he is known to be an unwavering supporter of the armed forces, and had even given them charge over almost everything happening in his administration. Despite his faith in the army, this hasn't stopped the numerous complaints about how these same men abuse human rights in the country, especially in the Nuevo Laredo region. The Army over the years has been accused of extrajudicial killings, arrests, abductions, and several other crimes. On February 26 this year, the Mexican armed forces were under intense criticism after they had shot and killed 5 unarmed young men in Nuevo Laredo. The young men had been riding inside a vehicle when the Army suddenly shot at them, even when they hadn't given verbal orders for the vehicle to stop. Angry civilians retaliated by attacking and beating some of the soldiers found in the area. Around April, 4 soldiers were charged with homicide, and in the same month, a human rights organization in Nuevo Laredo sent a formal complaint to the president. The complaint involved a man who stated that Mexican National Guard troops had fired on his vehicle in Nuevo Laredo, killing his pregnant 15-year-old girlfriend and a 54-year-old friend, and wounding 2 others. Several other attacks on people by the armed forces have been reported, and the execution of these 5 men seems to be the icing on the cake, with the government receiving nationwide and even international backlash. In a bid to quell the anger, Mexican prosecutors and the military promised the punishment of the soldiers, and on June 7, 2023, they were arrested. The Fuerzas Armadas, who they are, what they do. The Mexican Armed Forces, popularly known as the Fuerzas Armadas de Mexico, are the military forces of the United Mexican States. Known for their almost unconventional method when it comes to dealing with erring citizens, they have received both praise and criticism. While many may describe these acts as pragmatic, others have stated that the armed forces may be power drunk, as they seem to kill more than they detain or even wound and get away with it. You may be wondering, how did this body come to wield so much power? Established as a body in charge of national security, the Fuerzas Armadas have played an important political role in Mexico, and in recent times are heavily invested in the fight against organized crime. The armed forces is composed of 5 organizations, which include the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, and the Coast Guard. The Mexican Armed Forces is solely under the command of the President, who is also the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, also known as the Comandante Supremo de las Fuerzas Armadas. Now, what exactly is the work of the Fuerzas Armadas? The Mexican Armed Forces have 3 main missions, and the first is to repel external aggressions, which include bordering countries and others far away. The second mission of the Fuerzas Armadas is to ensure the internal security of the country, and this duty involves carrying out police actions against guerrilla forces, drug operations, cartels, and gang members, as well as ensuring political control is maintained. The third mission is to defend the country against natural disasters, ensuring that its citizens are protected from the impacts of disaster. Under this, the armed forces are tasked with providing the citizens with food, shelter, and medical services to those affected in events of floods or hurricanes. For instance, the armed forces went into action in March and April 2009 when the country was hit by an outbreak of a new strain of influenza known as swine flu, which infected many of its citizens and even spread to other parts of the world. In September 2010, parts of the country were badly affected by torrential rain, so that tens of thousands of residents of southern Mexico had to flee their homes. Veracruz, Oaxaca, and Tabasco suffered the most hits, as 900,000 people were affected. The armed forces were tasked with providing food, shelter, and medical assistance to those who needed them. In fact, the Fuerzas Armadas de Mexico is so good at their duty that Mexico ranks 31 out of 145 countries considered for the annual Global Firepower Review, which ranks world powers' military strength. In 2023, the nation holds a power index score of 0.4687, with 0.0000 considered perfect. However, in recent times, the Fuerzas Armadas de Mexico hasn't won the hearts of the citizens, as there have been thousands dozens of complaints centered on human rights abuse, torture, forced arrests, kidnappings, and extrajudicial killings levied. Ever since former President Felipe Calderón began the infamous drug war a decade ago, the armed forces have gained almost unlimited power in the guise of fighting against organized crime. Despite some defending the Fuerzas Armadas, saying it is the only institution with the training and discipline to win the fight against organized crime in the country, several others believe that the rate of human rights abuses has surged along with these so-called wins. But let's talk about why the Fuerzas Armadas consider them to be wins. Between 2007 to 2014, more than 164,000 people were victims of homicide, and this death toll continues to rise every year without signs of ending anytime soon. With the rate of crime in the country ranging from those perpetuated by cartels to robbery and gang violence by members of smaller criminal groups, it is almost easy to understand why the Fuerzas Armadas rule with an iron fist. This is almost expected considering that the Mexican legal system is ridden with corrupt officials, many who are under the payroll of the Mexican cartels. Hence, the armed forces resort to killing these offenders since they pretty much cannot rely on the legal system. However, innocent civilians often bear the brunt of these pragmatic acts, with citizens suffering all forms of abuse in the hands of these soldiers, which most times than not often resulted in death. For instance, on February 4th, 2015, a video was released on social media showing soldiers placing a plastic bag over the head of a handcuffed female and holding it tight to cut off the hostage's air supply while a rifle was pointed at her head. Due to the outrage it sparked, the armed forces were forced to take action against the officers involved. However, there are a multitude of cases that have gone on without any cautionary action from the Fuerzas Armadas. On June 30th, 2014, 22 people were killed by the army in a confrontation that occurred in a property near the borders between the states of Mexico, Guerrero, and Michoacan. The victims were alleged to be members of the Guerreros Unidos drug gang and consisted of 21 men and a woman. The Fuerzas Armadas bragged about killing all 22 criminals, with only one of theirs suffering a minor injury during the raid, and this assault raised several questions, with many condemning the excess of the army, as well as the government's oversight of these actions. Several human rights groups started to draw attention to the fact that 12 to 15 of these alleged criminals had surrendered but were executed, nonetheless with the army manipulating the crime scene to make it seem like they had died in a gunfire exchange. Although the soldiers involved were arrested, it wasn't long before most of them were acquitted and left to walk free again. The impunity within the Fuerzas Armadas continues to rise to the extent that several of these complaints are now reaching international bodies. One such case involved a man identified as Ramiro Lopez, who had been unduly arrested by the Mexican army along with 3 other men in June 2009. They were tortured, suffocated with plastic bags over their heads, and even their private parts shocked with electric currents, and then presented as confessed kidnappers. These men were then sentenced and convicted until 2015, when the United Nations carried out an examination that proved that the men were not guilty. In recent times, the Fuerzas Armadas have taken over control of the National Guards, which increases the role they play in civilian life. This act greatly increases the power the military wields, as they do not just focus on fighting against organized crime, but can also patrol the streets and perform what should have been the function of the police. There's no denying the fact that Mexican drug cartels and other criminal groups continue to grow deadlier with every passing day. It doesn't help that many of these cartels wield so much power that they are able to bribe their way out of the justice system and its punishments. Many agree that the Fuerzas Armadas is, without a doubt, doing their best to curb the excesses of these criminal organizations, and while that is acknowledged and even appreciated, they may also be doing little to nothing in curbing the violence. Mexico is already a hotbed with countless cases of violence reported almost every day, and these extrajudicial activities only highlight just how bad the situation is. Fuerza Armadas' villain arc. While we acknowledge that the Fuerzas Armadas take things too far in the execution of their duties, we also can't help but discuss the reason for this, which is that the cartel members often get their way. Mexico is well known for having international drug trafficking rings, with the country being home to some of the most deadly drug cartels in the world. These drug cartels not only commit all sorts of violent crimes aside from the drug trade, but they also heavily influence almost all facets of government. Almost every law enforcement agency has agents on their payroll, and those who are not swayed by the corruption are assassinated. A typical example is the case of Joaquin Guzman, popularly known as El Chapo, leader of the Sinaloa cartel. Dubbed one of the most powerful people in the world by Forbes between 2009 and 2013, El Chapo oversaw the operations of the Sinaloa cartel, which heavily trafficked and distributed cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, and marijuana in the United States and Europe. El Chapo heavily controlled many of the law enforcement officers in Mexico, ensuring that no one dared speak or act against his cartel. One of his indictments stated that from 2012, El Chapo heavily bribed Juan Orlando Hernandez with millions of dollars, which helped him win the presidency in Honduras Honduras in 2013. This ensured that the Sinaloa cartel and its allies had full control over the maritime and air transshipment destinations between the United States and South America. Other government officials within and outside Mexico also benefited from the Sinaloa cartel, which ensured that the cartel remained protected from the law. Even when the infamous drug lord was arrested in June 1993 and sentenced to 20 years and 9 months in prison on charges of drug trafficking, criminal association, and bribery, he still ruled the drug trafficking ring and officers. The Sinaloa cartel continued its operations like nothing had happened, and El Chapo regularly received suitcases loaded with cash which he used to bribe several of the prison officers. This ensured that drug kingpin maintained a life of luxury even while behind bars, with many of these officers taking on the roles of messengers and servants. Eventually, he was able to bribe these same prison officers into aiding his escape on January 19, 2001, as Francisco El Chito Camberos Rivera, a prison guard, opened the electronically operated cell door that housed the drug lord. Another prison maintenance worker known as Javier Camberos wheeled him out of the prison in a laundry cart, while another said along with Camberos transported him out of town in the trunk of a car. This escape plan cost El Chapo a whopping $2.5 million, as he was able to successfully bribe 78 people in the prison to aid his jailbreak, including the facility director, who got time in prison, as well as Camberos. The prison guards had been told not to search the laundry cart that transported El Chapo because he was smuggling gold out of the prison. Aside from having most of the prison guards on his payroll, he also held the police in Jalisco under his palm, as they allowed him 24 hours to get out of the state before the military manhunt commenced. A prison guard who came out to report what happened at the prison suddenly disappeared 7 years later, and many people today believe that he may have been killed by the cartel. December 2006, former Mexican President Felipe Calderón came into office and announced he was carrying out a drug war targeted at most of these cartels, and the news was met with pleasure by the citizens and even foreign countries. However, 4 years after, and it didn't seem apparent that there was a war waged against drugs, as the distribution of these narcotics within and outside the country continued unabated along with the violence. Out of the 53,000 arrests made by the administration, only 1,000 involved members of the Sinaloa cartel, who were, in fact, the leading drug traffickers in Mexico. This caused many to believe that Calderón may have also been under the payroll of the cartel. Although the president came out to deny these allegations, it was quite obvious that while other cartels were being heavily cracked down and dismantled, the Sinaloa cartel continued to thrive and even took over the territories of those affected, even though the law caught up with El Chapo and he was jailed and extradited to the U.S., where he's currently serving a life sentence. Nothing much has changed in Mexico after these years. The country still has a shaky legal system, with many of the officers under the payroll of these cartels. So arresting them and expecting them to stay in jail doesn't work, as these same people get out sooner or later. Airports and highways were spared, as shootouts also occurred at the Culiacan International Airport and Highway 15 in Sonora. There were also several reports about looting and carjacking happening across the state, and 10 soldiers, 19 gang members, and a police officer were killed during the chaos that ensued following Ovidio's unrest. Clearly, the cartel members were used to having their way, which led to the Fuerzas Armadas de Mexico opting to be the judge, jury, and executioner, since there was no hope in the legal system. Even recently, Jesus El Rey Zambada, the youngest brother of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, a top member of the Sinaloa cartel, alleged that the real leaders of the cartels in Mexico were the government and U.S. law enforcement. He even stated that Genaro Garcia Luna, who was Mexico's Secretary of Public Security from 2006 to 2012, frequently took bribes running into millions of dollars from the Sinaloa cartel and protected their interests in return. Salvador Cienfuegos, Mexico's defense minister from 2012 to 2018, was also implicated as one of those corrupt government officials who protected the Sinaloa cartel, ensuring they didn't get as much crackdown compared to other rival groups. In an October 2016 interview with the Mexican newspaper El Universal, a mid-level boss in La Linea, the armed wing of the Juarez cartel, said several U.S. border agents were on their payroll. The agents are bought, he said. If top members of these cartels can confidently say these, whether alleged or not, then there must be some level of truth to these statements. The justice system for many citizens in Mexico is a joke, since getting these bad guys off the streets does not solve the problem. Again, while we do not encourage the acts of the Fuerzas Armadas, isn't it a little easy to understand their desperation and the need to play an anti-hero? One way or the other, these bad guys always get out of prison. So unless they are extradited, the only other solution appears to lie at the end of a bullet: jungle justice. Surprisingly, these law enforcement groups have been taking the law into their hands for the longest time. They just didn't get as much publicity. For instance, there was the case of Eric Morales Guevara, popularly known as El Marino Loco, who was famous for capturing drug traffickers and humiliating them in the early 2000s. El Marino Loco, who was supposedly a member of the Mexican Navy, was some sort urban legend who helped hunt and ridicule the bad guys. He would go on a hunt for drug traffickers across the country, and when he captured them, he forced them to dress as women and kiss each other while sharing the videos for the world to see. While many saw him as a hero, there were others who believed that his methods were unorthodox and attributed this to him abusing his power and authority. A case that stood out was when El Marino Loco stormed into the home of Silvestre El Chivejaro Rodriguez, who was the alleged leader of the Gulf Cartel in the city of Tampico. Aside from raiding the property, El Marino Loco took the ashes of the crime boss's late father and also distorted one of the photographs. This sparked so much outrage among cartel members, especially El Chive, who immediately placed a price of 3 million pesos for the head of the local hero. Another case that showed just how daring Morales was when he raided the property of El Mimido, who was also a member of the Gulf Cartel. He then forced this feared cartel member to wear women's clothing and kiss his hitmen. This symbolism of effeminizing them was absolutely terrifying to the cartel members, and also caused the Mexican Navy to receive massive backlash since he was presumed to be one of their own. However, the local hero seemed to have disappeared mysteriously over the years, with some speculating that he was fired from the Navy, while others believe he is still secretly carrying out these heroic acts. Whatever it is, El Marino Loco clearly had no faith in the Mexican justice system, which led him to go on these manhunts to capture and ridicule these drug traffickers in a way that made them laughingstocks. The Fuerzas Armadas are in a way mirroring this exact act in what have been described as executions, and that isn't all. Civilians across different communities in Mexico are also taking the law into their hands and picking up arms against these cartels and gang members. In 2013, some men in Tierra Colorada decided to create a vigilante group that fought against the activities of these criminal groups. One of these men, 35-year-old Pedro Garibo, was once a farmer who tilled the arid lands of Mexico's Guerrero state. Now he carries a semi-automatic rifle along with other locals who are fed up with the extortions, murders, and rapes unleashed on their community by these drug gangs. "We are here to restore law and order," he said, pointing to a troop of about 30 men aged from 15 to 70 years old who were armed with machetes, .22 caliber rifles, automatic shotguns, and 9mm pistols. "Organized crime has gone beyond the state's ability to keep the peace, so we are doing it ourselves," he stated. In 2021, a video release showed children not older than 14 practicing how to shoot in the mountaintop village of Ayahualtempa in Guerrero State, Mexico. While many were enraged by the video, including the Mexican president, the truth was that these kids were just members of the small village who were preparing to defend themselves from the attacks of a drug cartel known as Los Ardillos, or the Squirrels. These villagers believe that self-defense is the only way out, as these cartel members always seem to have the upper hand. The Fuerzas Armadas taking the law into their hands isn't just a case within Mexico. Similar cases have also occurred in Colombia, where law enforcement groups have had to take the law into their hands as the only way out. For instance, Los Pepes was one of those paramilitaries known for its activities leading to the capture and death of infamous drug lord Pablo Escobar, derived from the Spanish phrase perseguidos por Pablo Escobar, which translated to persecuted by Pablo Escobar. The Los Pepes consisted mostly of people who were enemies of Escobar. In a bid to fish out the fugitive drug lord and fight against the Medellin cartel, they operated exactly like these cartels by carrying out public executions of men alleged to be Sicarios working with Escobar, and killing others who had ties with the cartel. It didn't matter who the person was, as long as they had ties with the drug lord. The Los Pepes killed these people, including guards, accountants, and lawyers. They were well known for using explosives in their attacks, causing destruction to properties that belonged to those affiliated with Escobar. The Search Bloc, also known as the Bloc de Busqueda, was another such law enforcement group that decided to roll in the mud with the bad guys. It consisted of 3 different ad hoc special operations units of the National Police of Colombia. They were charged with capturing and killing crime bosses and individuals deemed dangerous to the nation. The Search Bloc was originally created in 1986 by President Virgilio Barco with the sole objective of apprehending drug lord Pablo Escobar and his associates. It is believed that the Search Bloc collaborated with the Los Pepes in ensuring the capture of Escobar, and on December 2, 1993, the group achieved its goal. After a shootout during the capture of Escobar, the drug lord was hit and died on a rooftop along with his bodyguard. However, its methods, especially the collaboration with Los Pepes, were deemed unorthodox by several people. All of these leads back to the elephant in the room. Do you have to fight dirty to beat the bad guys? Ethically, these law enforcement groups are going about dishing justice in the wrong way, but this has proven to be the most effective in the fight against organized crime in Mexico. This video of Mexican militaries executing Sicarios is going viral, and everyone has something to say. If you're not sure what your answer is to my question, you should watch this video on your screen. I'm certain that by the end of that video, you'll have your answer.